is Azim Moha and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. Lebanon casts doubt over Trump's claim of upcoming talks with Israel. Wave of Russian drone and missile attacks kill at least 16 in Ukraine. And Pope Leo visits Cameroon with message of peace amid attacks from Trump. Lebanon is not aware of planned talks with Israel, according to official sources. This follows an announcement by U.S. President Donald Trump that leaders of Israel and Lebanon will hold talks later. Here's more.
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that the leaders of Israel and Lebanon will speak to each other for the first time in 34 years on Thursday. In a post on his Truth Social platform, Trump said the aim is to create what he called a little breathing room between the two sides. However, Lebanon denies Trump's claims on talks with Israel. According to two Lebanese official sources, there is no information about a reported call between Lebanon's presidency and Israel. The announcements follows a meeting on Tuesday at the State Department between Lebanese Ambassador Nada Hamadeh and Israeli Ambassador Yechiel Leiter, hosted by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The United Nations welcomes the talks between Lebanese and Israeli representatives held on Tuesday, describing the dialogue as an important first step toward breaking the cycle of violence and ending hostilities. Trump's claims accepted as his desire to end Israel-Lebanon conflict.
The White House has signaled behind the scenes that President Trump wants to see the end of hostilities between Israel and Lebanon, where clashes between Israeli forces and Iranian-backed Hezbollah continue. While the U.S.-Iranian negotiations are technically separate from the Israeli-Lebanon talks, officials in Washington believe that an end to the fighting in Lebanon could help in efforts to reach a deal with Iran.
The diplomatic push comes as hostilities continue on the ground. The Israeli army on Thursday urged residents in southern Lebanon to evacuate areas south of the Zerani River, citing ongoing military operations against Hezbollah. According to the Lebanese Health Ministry, Israeli attacks on Lebanon have killed over 2,000 people since the latest conflict began.
Border communities along the Israel-Lebanon frontier are divided between demanding a decisive end to the threat and advocating for lasting stability. Some are backing continued military action, while others are calling for a lasting agreement with Lebanon. At the same time, Pakistan links calm on the border to broader Iran-related diplomacy.
Residents of northern Israel are expressing mixed reactions to the prospect of a new ceasefire with Lebanon's Hezbollah, following weeks of escalating violence along the border. The latest tensions began on March 2nd, when Hezbollah launched rocket attacks in support of Iran, prompting Israel to respond with a military offensive just over a year after the previous major conflict. While some locals are calling for a decisive military victory as previously pledged by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, others are urging a sustainable peace agreement that benefits civilians on both sides.
I'm against the ceasefire because if we do the ceasefire right now, it's going to be a problem because we have to get into the war again in about a month, maybe 2 months. It never ends. We have to finish it right now.
I think that if this is a real ceasefire, then it's long overdue. There is no territorial dispute here. It's just an Iranian proxy called Hezbollah, drowning the whole region down. I think it would be best for the people of Lebanon and the people of Israel to end this war. Not just a ceasefire, but a peace agreement, a real peace agreement. No one will lose anything. There's only something to gain here for everyone. Hezbollah needs to go back to Iran.
I have a year-old grandson who is not seeing a daylight. He doesn't leave the shelter. I am disappointed and I am not in favor of a ceasefire. The Israeli army went into Lebanon. I feel for the soldiers. I feel very sorry for the soldiers, really. I say my blessings for them every night, but enough is enough.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump said Lebanese and Israeli leaders would speak for the first time in decades on Thursday. However, Lebanese officials have denied this claim.
US President Donald Trump says it is very possible the US could reach a peace deal with Iran before King Charles III's visit later this month. The White House says discussions on further negotiations are ongoing, with no date scheduled yet for the next meeting. Iran reports that talks are continuing through Pakistani mediation and insists the United States must prove its sincerity, while adding it is open to discussing uranium enrichment but maintains its right to nuclear energy. Pakistan's top general Asim Munir has arrived in Tehran to mediate renewed Iran-US talks in Islamabad as the fragile two-week ceasefire approaches its April 21st deadline. Turaj Shiralilu has more from Tehran.
The commander of Pakistan's army, Field Marshal Asim Munir, is visiting Tehran for high-level talks as Islamabad has stepped up mediation efforts to host renewed de-escalation negotiations between Iran and the United States. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who welcomed the Pakistani army chief and was the first high-ranking official to hold a meeting with General Munir on Wednesday, said Tehran and Islamabad shared the commitment to promote peace and stability in the region. Pakistan's top general is scheduled to meet Iranian leaders, including Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who led Iranian negotiators in Islamabad last Saturday. To follow up the mediation efforts, General Munir will reportedly fly to Washington on Friday to meet with the U.S. officials. The two-week fragile ceasefire between Iran, the U.S., and Israel approaches its deadline next Tuesday. Meantime, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi held phone calls with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi and Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi. They discussed the Iran-US talks as well as the ongoing tension in the region following the US blockade of Iranian sovereign ports in the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman. In a related development, commander of Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, Major General Ali Abdullahi, issued a stern warning against the continued ban on Iran's vessels, saying Iran will act forcefully to defend its national sovereignty and interests. And in the first ever high-level contact between leaders of Iran and the United Arab Emirates in the wake of the Israeli-US war on Iran since 28th of February, Speaker Ghalibaf held a phone call with the UAE Vice President and Deputy Premier Mansour bin Zayed. They discussed regional developments and ways to de-escalate tensions in the region, according to Iranian media quoting Emirates' state-owned WAM news agency. During the war, Iran targeted the US military bases and interests in the region countries, including the UAE, which were used to attack the Islamic Republic. Turaj Shiralilu from Tehran, Foreign News.
Pakistan says it will continue to facilitate engagement and dialogue between Iran and the United States. The comments come after the US and Iran failed to reach an agreement to end the hostilities after last week's talks in Islamabad. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Tahir Andrabi said no dates have been set for a second round of talks between the US and Iran, but stressed the importance of maintaining a ceasefire.
You would recall that in his remarks at the conclusion of these talks, the Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Mohammad Ishaq Dar, had expressed hope that the two sides would continue with the positive spirit to achieve durable peace and prosperity in the entire region and beyond. It is imperative that the parties continue to uphold their commitment to ceasefire. The DPM has also reiterated that Pakistan has been and will continue to play its role to facilitate engagement and dialogue between the two countries in the days to come.
European-led efforts to organize a maritime security initiative in the Strait of Hormuz are taking shape as Britain and France prepare to host virtual talks on Friday with partner countries. Experts say the initiative reflects an effort to build a limited coalition focused on maritime security.
Britain and France are preparing to co-host virtual talks aimed at restoring freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, as tensions rise in the Gulf following competing maritime restrictions and growing diplomatic friction. According to French President Emmanuel Macron, the initiative could include discussions on a strictly defensive naval mission involving willing partner countries. The aim, officials say, is to stabilize shipping routes through one of the world's most critical energy corridors. But experts caution that the situation remains highly volatile, with limited scope for immediate impact.
Any mission to secure the passage for the ships in the Strait of Hormuz has to be put together against the diplomatic background. You have to discuss with the Iranians, otherwise you'll be working under the constant threat of Iranian military fire, which is what, of course, both the UK, France, and the other non-belligerent countries who are part in the conference definitely want to avoid. So this is why they speak about not only de-escalation, but ceasefire, and then say that they prepare for the post-conflict.
Analysts say the conference reflects efforts to manage escalating risks at sea, as shipping flows remain uncertain and political pressure mounts.
I don't think this video conference will have an immediate impact. Today, everybody is just watching which ships have managed to pass the Strait of Hormuz, proving that neither the Iranians impose full blockades. We know that what they want is to have the countries paying fees to get their ships out of the Strait of Hormuz. But on the American side, there is no capacity to fully block the entrance of the strait either.
She added that European efforts are unfolding in a complex geopolitical environment shaped by US actions and competing strategies.
Underlying assumptions of this initiative is that the current war is not our war, and that maybe it's not even legitimate in some way. So it does not articulate with the American position so far. But it's clear that on the other hand, when Donald Trump decided that he would start the blockade himself of Hormuz, he will be calling for alignment from his partners.
Schmid also said Europe remains unable to act independently of Washington in the unfolding crisis. The expert said the diplomatic push highlights competing strategies over maritime control, with no clear breakthrough expected in the short term.
Ukraine is reeling after a wave of overnight strikes hit several major cities. At least 16 people were killed and dozens more injured.
Russia has launched one of its deadliest attacks on Ukraine this year, killing at least 16 people and injuring dozens in overnight missile and drone strikes across multiple cities. The assault hit the capital Kyiv, as well as Dnipro and the southern port city of Odessa, damaging residential buildings and critical infrastructure. In Kyiv, at least 4 people, including a 12-year-old child, were killed while dozens were wounded. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said several of the injured, including emergency workers, were taken to hospital. Rescue teams also pulled a mother and child from the rubble of a heavily damaged apartment block.
It's just scary, that's all. I fear for our country and for everything we have. I feel so sorry for the children. So many people died today. Children died. It's so sad.
Elsewhere, at least 9 people were killed in Odessa and 2 in Dnipro, where strikes set residential buildings on fire. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia launched a large-scale barrage of ballistic and cruise missiles, along with hundreds of drones. While many were intercepted, several hit residential areas, causing widespread destruction. Meanwhile, Russian authorities say Ukrainian drone attacks killed 2 children and damaged homes and facilities in Russia's Krasnodar region. The attack comes as Ukraine faces a critical shortage of air defense systems, particularly US-made Patriot missiles used to intercept ballistic threats. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the situation is at its worst. The latest violence follows a brief Easter ceasefire, with both sides accusing each other of violations. Efforts to negotiate an end to the war remain stalled, with Kyiv calling for a full ceasefire, while Moscow insists on broader peace terms first.
Pope Leo XIV is continuing his Africa tour with a strong message of peace. He arrived in the mineral-rich country of Cameroon and was greeted by tens of thousands who lined the streets to welcome his visit, while he also delivered a speech on combating corruption.
Pope Leo XIV has arrived in Cameroon, pressing ahead with a message of peace and justice despite sharp criticism from Donald Trump. Trump has repeatedly criticised the Pope during his Africa tour over his views on global conflicts and social issues. In response, the pontiff did not name him directly, but stressed the need for dialogue, saying people can live together in peace despite their differences. Speaking in the capital Yaoundé, he urged leaders to take a bold leap forward and warned that corruption undermines trust in authority. Addressing Paul Biya, the president of Cameroon, he said the chains of corruption must be broken for justice to prevail.
Hearts must be set free from an idolatrous thirst for profit. True profit comes from integral human development. That is, the balanced growth of all the aspects that make life on this earth a blessing.
He also called for an end to violence in Cameroon's English-speaking regions, where a separatist conflict has claimed thousands of lives. During his 3-day visit, he is expected to travel to Bamenda for a peace meeting, with armed groups announcing a temporary pause in fighting. Crowds gathered in Yaoundé to welcome the Pope, singing and dancing in scenes reflecting hope for change and unity. The Cameroon leg is part of a broader 10-day Africa tour that includes Angola and Equatorial Guinea. A major mass is expected in Douala, where large crowds are anticipated. Before arriving in Cameroon, Pope Leo visited Algeria, where he promoted interfaith dialogue and peaceful coexistence. In Annaba, he highlighted the teachings of St. Augustine of Hippo, urging unity across religions. Throughout the trip, the Pope has maintained a consistent message. Peace, respect and justice must prevail over division, regardless of political pressure.
Still on his Africa tour, Angolan Catholics and church leaders say they are looking forward to Pope Leo's upcoming visit, describing it as a moment of hope, unity and pride for the country's largest religious community.
Angola is preparing for the upcoming visit of Pope Leo XIV on Saturday. The city's streets and public spaces are marked by billboards and posters announcing the papal visit, expected to be one of the most significant religious events in the country in years. Churchgoers and clergy say the visit represents a moment of unity for Catholics in Angola, where the church remains the largest religious denomination.
The coming of the Pope represents a lot, mainly happiness, hope and cheer to those who are daughters and sons of the Catholic Church. The Pope is someone we consider the representative of Christ in the world, and he is coming to visit the Church, which means that we must be united so that the Church finds more and more development in terms of new members, which would bring us joy. We are expecting the Pope with lots of excitement.
In Kilamba, worshippers said the visit would strengthen Africa's international visibility.
And it's good because it will elevate, the name of Africa all over the world. People from other continents are going to see, Pope in Angola, and it represents very good things in Africa because, Catholic Church, Vatican, they are in top, churches everywhere.
During the visit, Pope Leo XIV is expected to hold Mass, meet church leaders and engage with officials and the public in a series of events across Angola as part of a wider African tour that includes Algeria, Cameroon and Equatorial Guinea.
Artificial intelligence is fueling a sharp rise in electricity demand, with new analysis warning that fast-growing data centers could put pressure on power systems worldwide as expansion accelerates.
A new report from the International Energy Agency finds electricity use from data centers rose 17% in 2025, with demand expected to double by 2030. The surge is being driven by heavy investment from major technology firms whose combined spending on AI infrastructure topped $400 billion last year and is set to rise by a further 75% in 2026. While AI systems are becoming more efficient per task, overall demand continues to climb as usage expands and more energy-intensive applications come online. The IEA warns that growth is increasingly constrained by real-world bottlenecks, including slow grid connections and tight supply chains for key equipment such as transformers and gas turbines, delaying new projects. In response, tech companies are ramping up energy partnerships, accounting for around 40% of corporate renewable power purchase agreements last year, while also backing nuclear and advanced geothermal projects. The report also highlights a growing pipeline of agreements linked to small modular reactor nuclear projects, which has nearly doubled in capacity terms over the past year. At the same time, developers are turning to on-site gas generation and battery storage to manage rapid swings in demand, particularly as AI data centers scale up. IEA Executive Director Fatih Birol says countries able to deliver secure and affordable electricity will have a clear advantage in the AI era, adding, "There is no AI without energy." The agency adds that while rising demand does not automatically mean higher prices, large and rapidly expanding data centers could still pose challenges for energy affordability and grid stability without the right policies in place.
After the break, we'll look at Russia-China relations as the Strait of Hormuz remains under blockade and the Russian economy faces a sudden contraction. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. China is increasingly at the center of global diplomacy, balancing closer ties with Russia while managing tense relations with the United States. Sergei Lavrov's visit to Beijing, fresh signals of a Putin trip, and shifting energy politics all raise questions about Beijing's next move. Joining us to discuss this is Anna Evans, political analyst, joining us from Lisbon, Portugal. Thank you for joining us, Anna.
Thank you.
Now, how significant is Lavrov's visit in this situation, showing China and Russia remained strategically aligned?
Well, it is indeed significant. This is one of those critical junctures when it is very important to show to the world that the geopolitics between these two countries, Russia and China, remain very much aligned. And why is that so? Because of the situation in Iran and the conflict in the Hormuz Strait. So although Russia does not send its oil and gas to China via the Hormuz Strait, it basically uses northern and western Chinese corridors and oil and gas pipelines, so it doesn't use the Hormuz Strait. But the fact is that, a lot of Iranian oil was being exported to China. Basically, China purchases 90% of Iranian oil, and the fact that there is big trouble, and conditionality and limits to navy and shipping in the Hormuz Strait at this stage means that all the energy that Russia sells to China has become absolutely precious. And so if there is a juncture at which the partnership has become really vital for both countries' national security, this is it. Because China supports Russia in financial terms and in technological terms with regard to the war in Ukraine. And now China vitally needs Russia even more than it needed before for its energy. So this is national security partnership on both ends, very critical and vital for both countries. The current geopolitical situation and conflict in the Middle East.
Now, Xi Jinping called ties with Russia precious, as you already just mentioned. What message does this send to Washington and Europe?
Well, it tells Washington and Europe, it emphasizes how important for both countries' national security strategies and, their current geopolitical stance, their partnership is, because if energy is so precious to Russia, and Russia's financial backing is so, if energy is so precious for China's imports, and in turn, Russia's imports of technology and other goods from China are so important for Russia, and the financial lifeline that the energy exports from Russia to China provide Russia, this is so vital for both national securities that the two countries are making it clear that no matter what the situation is in the Middle East, there is no dismantling or no weakening of their respective partnerships. And so it's a very, very clear message. The narrative makes it like a very strong alignment vis-a-vis the US, the usual alignment of Russia, Iran, and China remains, and the US has its own problems with aligning or not aligning with its Western partners. So it is a very clear cleavage, between these traditional alignments.
Now, with Russia's economy reportedly weakening, does Moscow now need Beijing more than Beijing needs Moscow?
This is a great question, James, because that's the issue of the asymmetry of the relationship between the two countries. Often analysts say that China is the major partner in the relation, and because of China's size, its massive stance in terms of domain of critical raw materials, all its investments, through the Silk Road and, the Belt and Road Initiative and all the programs surrounding it, so China always shows up as the one partner that has leverage. And so the links and the association, which is not an institutional one, but it is a partnership between China and Russia, usually traditionally appear with China as the bigger partner. But at this specific stage, when President Trump decided to block the Hormuz Strait, this meant that Iran could not send its ships to China. Iranian oil and fossil fuels could not pass to China because one must bear in mind that over the past month, when Iran shut the Strait of Hormuz, it was a problem for other ships that, you know, are related to the Western allies, but not for Iranian own, you know, exports to China. But when President Trump made it very clear that the American naval capacity would be put to, you know, to filter, you know, the Iranian shipping to countries, and including China, of course, that means that now China is at risk in energy terms. And so, you know, that this turns the Russian-Chinese alignment very critical for China at this stage. And so it decreases the asymmetry of the relationship between China and Russia, and the relationship becomes, you know, more equal in terms of needs. However, we must take into account that China's economy is at a better stage currently than Russia's war economy is, because of the wearing down of the war for all these years, you know, the Russian war in Ukraine. So China has not felt, you know, the big hit of the energy crisis yet, whereas Russia has, you know, been dealing with the war situation for a very prolonged time.
Anna, on that backdrop, as Putin is expected to visit China soon, what would both leaders want to achieve from that summit?
Well, you know, this is a two-purpose summit. You know, on the one hand, the two leaders want to again demonstrate that their alignment remains intact, and that you know, their vital interests in economic security, technological, financial terms remain identical. And so this is, on the one hand, a show of strength and a show of alignment to the Western, you know, to the US and vis-a-vis Western allies of the US. But on the other hand, also, the major goal is precisely to strengthen the sorts of investments, infrastructural investments, that make the flow of energy possible. And so it is necessary to negotiate pipeline, you know, infrastructures that will reinforce the existing ones, and as well as Chinese investments in these kinds of infrastructures that connect the two countries. Also, you know, the Chinese very important interest in the critical raw materials that are important for IT industries. You know, these are all items that are really important at this stage. Security as well, because Iran needs, you know, at this stage, Iran needs Chinese security, but Russia also needs Chinese equipment for its war in Ukraine. So China is, in this particular geopolitical context, you know, as always, a very vital partner for both Iran and Russia, for the usual triangle: Iran, Russia, China. So this is, you know, the security aspect, the technology aspect, and the infrastructures for energy. These are major topics that will be discussed between Lavrov and Xi Jinping and the Chinese administration.
Mm-hmm. Now, would you say that China is positioning itself as a power broker between rival global camps rather than choosing one side outright?
Well, this is China's usual strategy. China tends to wait and see how, you know, geopolitical crises evolve before really meddling intensely. In this situation,
obviously, China has very clear interests, both with regard to Russia, who is at war with Ukraine, and with regard to Iran and the Middle East conflict. And so China, because of its energy voracious consumption and needs, has very keen interests, in the current geopolitical situation. But its traditional posture is a posture of consensus, of, bringing principles and norms that are universally accepted, like national sovereignty, the will for peace, the respect for borders and boundaries. And so China always appears as a part that attempts to be neutral and attempts, publicly to appease conflicting situations. And for example, very recently, in Pakistan, with the peace plan and the peace negotiations that Pakistan mediated between Iran and the US, the peace plan had the hand of China, and, China is very silently a back channel. I would not characterize it as a global mediator, although China has had, already at specific instances, important roles in terms of treaty making, including, for example, in the Middle East, and also in the Ukraine war. We know that China, has played the role of a silent mediator. However, that is not its traditional way to behave, to be at the forefront and at the center of limelight. So China likes, the Chinese culture does not stimulate great limelight. It is a culture of silent negotiation, silent mediation, and like a backstage role.
Anna, thank you very much for sharing your time and insights with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to WAY News. Azerbaijan and Russia are taking steps to further strengthen their economic partnership, with new discussions focused on trade growth, regional connectivity, and modernizing transport systems.
The 24th session of the Intergovernmental Commission on Economic Cooperation between Azerbaijan and Russia was held in Zangilan, co-chaired by Deputy Prime Minister Shahin Mustafayev and Alexey Verchuk. Mustafayev said bilateral economic ties continue to grow steadily, noting that trade exceeded $4.9 billion in 2025, while Russian investments surpassed $10 billion. He also emphasized the strategic importance of the North-South transport corridor, where transit volumes have increased by more than 20%, alongside the expanding cooperation in transport, agriculture and industry. Overchuk in turn said Russia is continuing work on the Resht-Astara railway project with a focus on improving logistics and tariff conditions. He also highlighted tourism potential in the Caspian region, where mutual tourist flows have reached 700,000 people, and noted that economic cooperation is expanding, now involving 75 Russian regions. Following the meeting, the sides signed a protocol and adopted a roadmap to introduce a digital consignment system for road transport in both Azerbaijan and Russia. Abkhaya Jafarova, Ilkin Mehtiev, A News, Zangilan.
Georgia's parliament has approved amendments to the law on grants in an expedited procedure, a move that is already drawing scrutiny from civil society groups and international partners. The changes redefine what qualifies as a foreign grant and introduce new exemptions, raising questions about transparency, political influence, and the future of international funding in the country. Our correspondent, Nini Nikolashvili, has more.
The Jordan parliament has adopted amendments to the law on grants with 72 votes in favor in a fast-tracked legislative process. The changes were presented by the chair of the Legal Affairs Committee, Archil Gorduladze, and introduce a revised framework for how foreign funding is classified and regulated. Under the amendments, funds provided by diplomatic missions, consular offices, and international organizations accredited in Georgia will no longer be considered grants if they are linked to political or public interests associated with a foreign government or political party. The legislation also exempts the Georgian Red Cross Society and its funding activities from standard grant regulations. The government says the amendments are intended to improve legal clarity and ensure transparency in financial flows, particularly where foreign funding may be connected to political processes. Officials also argue that the changes are necessary to safeguard national sovereignty and prevent external actors from influencing domestic affairs through financial instruments. However, critics contend that the amendments risk reducing transparency around foreign funding and could be used to limit oversight of politically sensitive financial flows. The law builds on earlier debates in Georgia over foreign-funded organizations, which have intensified in recent years amid broader tensions between the government and Western partners. Previous legislative initiatives in this area have prompted strong reactions from international actors, including European Union officials and Western diplomats who warned that such measures could undermine civil society and democratic institutions. Opposition figures and non-governmental organizations have voiced concern that the new amendments may create loopholes allowing certain politically aligned funding to bypass scrutiny while simultaneously increasing pressure on independent organizations reliant on foreign support. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
14 people have been detained in Armenia as part of an investigation into alleged vote buying ahead of upcoming parliamentary elections. According to local media and the Anti-Corruption Committee, the suspects are linked to the Strong Armenia Party, led by businessman Samvel Karapetyan. Authorities say the suspects both gave and took bribes to influence the election. The payments were allegedly hidden as charity or salaries through linked NGOs. The party denies the claims, calling the case politically motivated. The arrests come as Karapetyan's trial begins at the Anti-Corruption Court. He faces charges including money laundering and calls to overthrow the constitutional order. Strong Armenia remains a key opposition force ahead of the June election. The Armenian parliament has approved amendments to the law on audiovisual media in a second and final reading, introducing a ban on foreign programs that show signs of interference in the country's internal affairs. The new legislation specifically targets content broadcast via the public television multiplex. Under the revised law, any foreign-produced programming found to be meddling in domestic political processes or state sovereignty will be prohibited from the national airwaves. Antalya is preparing to host a major international gathering, bringing together the world's leaders and experts to discuss pressing global issues in the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. A-News' Katie Wilson brings us more.
Hello from Antalya. We are here as the city is gearing up for the 5th Antalya Diplomacy Forum, which is set to kick off tomorrow. Now, this is an annual gathering of world leaders, global figures in business, diplomacy, academia, and it brings people together to discuss global challenges facing our world. Now, the theme for this year's conference is Mapping Tomorrow and Managing Uncertainty. So a very apt theme there, given the outbreak of war in the Middle East just a few months ago. And there are already conversations being planned on the sidelines of this forum in regards to peace in the Gulf and the situation over there. Now, plenty of heads of state are expected to be gathering at the forum, including, of course, the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, who touched down this afternoon. And we are expecting President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, to be opening the forum tomorrow with a speech. And we're here throughout the forum, and I'll be bringing you all of the developments, all of the new lines as they come. But for now, the city is gearing up and looking forward to the forum tomorrow. This is Katie Wilson and Elbruz Musayev from Antalya.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has arrived in Doha as part of a regional visit to Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Turkey this week. Sharif met Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, where the two leaders discussed the latest regional and international developments, particularly in the Middle East. Sharif reiterated his condemnation of attacks against Qatar and other Gulf countries, while reaffirming Pakistan's full solidarity and support for the leadership and people of Qatar. South Korea is stepping up efforts to diversify its energy supplies, announcing new crude oil arrangements with Kazakhstan, Saudi Arabia and other major Middle Eastern producers as part of its long-term energy security strategy, with hundreds of millions of barrels set to be delivered through 2026.
South Korea has agreed with Kazakhstan on the supply of 18 million barrels of crude oil, according to the head of the South Korean presidential administration, Kang Hoon-sik. The announcement comes as Seoul outlines a broader energy procurement plan involving a total of 273 million barrels of oil from Kazakhstan, Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries through to the end of 2026, alongside 2.1 million tons of naphtha. Kang Hoon-sik made the disclosure following a diplomatic tour that included a visit to Astana, stressing that the new supply arrangements are aimed at strengthening energy security by using alternative routes that bypass the Strait of Hormuz. Until now, around 61% of South Korea's crude oil imports and more than half of its naphtha imports have passed through this strategic checkpoint. Within the overall framework, Kazakhstan accounts for only about 6% of total volumes with 18 million barrels, while Saudi Arabia remains the dominant supplier under long-term contracts. South Korean authorities say the contracted volumes could cover the country's energy needs for more than 3 months under normal conditions. Deliveries via alternative routes are expected to take around 50 to 60 days, similar to shipments from the United States. So while Astana is clearly expanding its export reach, it's still too early to suggest that South Korea is shifting toward Kazakh crude as a primary source. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Uzbekistan's Center of Islamic Civilization has been officially recognized as the world's largest museum dedicated to Islamic heritage, marking a major milestone in the country's cultural development.
The Center of Islamic Civilization in Uzbekistan has been awarded a Guinness World Records title as the largest museum dedicated to Islamic civilization, following a formal verification process. The recognition was confirmed by adjudicator Sheida Subashi Dimichi, who highlighted the uniqueness and cultural value of each exhibit. The complex was initiated in 2017 under the The Center of Islamic Civilization in Uzbekistan has been awarded a Guinness World Records title as the largest museum dedicated to Islamic civilization, following a formal verification process. The recognition was confirmed by adjudicator Sheida Subashi Dimichi, who highlighted the uniqueness and cultural value of each exhibit. The complex was initiated in 2017 under the leadership of Shavkat Mirziyoyev and completed in March 2026. Designed as a scientific, educational and cultural hub, it combines historical artifacts with modern technologies to present the contributions of Islamic civilization to global development. According to officials, the scale and depth of the project position Uzbekistan as an active participant in global cultural dialogue. Chief architect Abdukahor Turdiev noted that the design reflects the country's rich historical legacy, while also aligning with contemporary approach to museum development. The center has quickly become one of the most visited cultural sites in the region, attracting up to 5,000 visitors daily. The center spans 10 hectares within the Hazrati Imam complex, with a total usable area exceeding 42,000 square meters. Among its most valuable exhibits are more than 100 rare manuscripts of the Quran, including the renowned Usman Quran listed in UNESCO's Memory of the World Register. The collection also includes unique artifacts such as a gold pictorial from the Amu Darya treasure, rare manuscripts from the various Islamic dynasties, and historical objects reflecting centuries of scientific, cultural and artistic development across the region. It is Cyril Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan A News.
The United Nations says it has continued reaching millions of Afghans with essential support, even as international humanitarian aid to Afghanistan declines. New figures from the UN show funding for basic human needs programs rose for a third straight year in 2025, reaching $1.7 billion. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more.
Despite a drop in global humanitarian assistance, the United Nations says it was still able to deliver a vital support across Afghanistan throughout 2025. According to the UN, millions of Afghans received essential services, economic opportunities, and livelihood assistance under its strategic framework for Afghanistan. The organization says more than 34 million people were reached with healthcare. More than 4.6 million children were enrolled in public education with UN support, and around 45,000 long-term jobs were created. But the UN says conditions remain very difficult, with aid cuts, population movements, climate pressures, natural disasters and operational challenges continuing to affect families and essential services across Afghanistan. This comes amid a broader humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, with nearly half of the population needing aid in 2025 because of food insecurity, weak health services, drought, disaster risks and pressure from returning populations. UNICEF has also warned that in 2026 an estimated 21.9 million people, including 11.6 million children, will still require humanitarian assistance. The UN says communities across Afghanistan have shown resilience, working with aid agencies and partners, not only to meet urgent needs, but also to build a longer-term recovery and self-reliance. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Well, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.